Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss how the government have slowly moved themselves towards the position that Brexit is, after all, responsible for the shortages that we are experiencing in Britain right now, but that it's all the public's fault and not theirs. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So there was an article in a cold storage journal, which is an important link in the supply chain, of course, and one which will fully understand what is the real cause of their problems. Indeed, those in the industry who were paying attention will have warned about the problems well in advance. Indeed, several did, which is why I was able to talk about them long before they occurred. In a way, one of the most tragic aspects of Brexit is that the consequences were very predictable, and the warnings were absolutely there for anyone who was interested to see and hear. But when it comes to the storage side of the supply chain, the key problem is with haulage. With a severe shortage of lorry drivers, you can have a full warehouse, but no way of shifting your stock to the supermarket shelves where it can then be distributed to the public. In the article, there was reference to the problems that Brexit had caused the industry. Not the pandemic, but Brexit. They also reported what the government had to say about this, and it's the first part of this statement that's the focus of this video. Quote, "The British people repeatedly voted to end free movement and take back control of our immigration system, and employers should invest in our domestic workforce instead of relying on labour from abroad." Now, there's a lot going on in that statement. I'd like to cover it all, but I could talk an hour about different bits of it. I'm going to focus really on the first bit. The British people repeatedly voted to end free movement. Did they? Let's see about that. The British people have effectively had 3 votes on Brexit. The first one was, of course, the referendum of 2016. On that occasion, 23% of the British people voted to leave the EU. More than the percentage who voted to remain, sure enough, because the over half the population didn't say one way or the other. But in what sense can we ever say that 23% of the British people voting for something is the same as the British people voting for something? Now, you could certainly argue that those 23% did vote to end free movement. I mean, it wasn't on the ballot. It wasn't actually what they ticked a box against. The literature that promised an end to free movement was entirely written by people who did not have the power at the time to follow through on it. But it was a core part of the message, certainly. So at this point, I would absolutely argue that even though you would still say, out of those 23% of the British people, not all of them would have voted for Brexit for free movement, but all of them would have had to accept responsibility that ticking that box to leave the EU was going to end free movement. But that is still less than a quarter of the British people voting to end free movement on that occasion. Second, 2017 general election. The manifesto made certain promises regarding immigration, as all Conservative manifestos do. But it didn't promise to end free movement. On the contrary, it actually talked about mutual agreement to secure the rights of EU nationals in the UK in return for those UK citizens in the EU. It was ambiguous. You could argue that given that we're going to leave the EU anyway, that would bring with it an end to movement, free movement. But a vote for the Conservatives in 2017 was not a vote for an end to free movement because it was not in their manifesto. Also, 21% of the British people voted for the Conservatives in 2017. So no matter how you read between the lines of their manifesto, it was only supported by 21% of the British population. Even of the people who voted, it was still only 42%. That's still not a majority. On no measure was this the British people voting for an end to freedom of movement. Then the final vote was 2019, of course, where Boris Johnson won his majority. Now, this manifesto did promise to end free movement, no question about that. But just as in 2017, only 21% of the British people actually voted for that. By comparison, 25% of people voted for parties that were dead against the ending of free movement. Indeed, parties that were promising another vote on leaving the EU. So their statement that the British people repeatedly voted for this is false. In fact, on no occasion have the British people voted for this. On one occasion, more people voted for end of free movement than voted against it. On one occasion. That's not repeatedly. But it is interesting. See, we always suspected that Brexit would go through several phases. The first phase, of course, was to pretend that all the warnings of dire consequences were false. Project Fear, they called it. The second phase was what happened when we had to explain the conditions of our exit from the EU. So before we actually leave, we had to come up with some legal framework for leaving. Which is why some Brexiteers wanted us to leave without any deal at all. Reality would start to leach in and they would have to change the goalposts. They did. They went from promising full access to the single market to no access to the single market and behaving as if that's what people voted for all along. The third phase was when Brexit actually became a reality. They would have to deny the causes as much as possible. Now here, the pandemic and a disappointingly timid main opposition have given the Conservatives lots of excuses to smudge the consequences of Brexit. Then you've got the fourth phase. That's when you can no longer blame other things. Because whatever the other things are, they eventually go away, or you notice that those other things are affecting other people, but the consequences aren't. But because Brexit remains, the problems of Brexit also remain. The fourth phase is about blame. Once denial can no longer work, once you can no longer claim that Brexit's brilliant, you have to accept that Brexit's a load of crap, you then have to go, oh yeah, Brexit's a bit rubbish. It's not our fault though, because we were just doing what, you told us to do. Get the blame in. Hopefully the fifth phase is people waking up to this nonsense. But the point is that the government are full on blame mode. They've blamed the EU, predictable but limited. They have blamed Remainers and Labour. Quite how Brexit can be the fault of people who consistently voted against it is one of the modern wonders of the world, but there it is. And now the government are getting ready to blame the public. Once these food shortages really start to bite, and they're only going to get worse until they do something about it, people are going to see just what damage they've done with Brexit. The government seem fine with damage as long as they can blame someone else for it. Indeed, who can blame them? Because they've caused a massive amount of damage ever since they came back to power in 2010. They have successfully blamed someone else for it and keep winning general elections. So of course that's their mindset now. With this statement, they're actually blaming two groups of people for good measure. The first group of people is the Brexit voting public, which is an odd play. Usually when they blame people, they blame a marginalised group who don't traditionally vote for them anyway. Like with COVID, they tend to pin most of the blame on young people. So it allows their own voters to feel fine about their stupidity in not wearing masks and pin the blame on a group of people who hardly vote at all. By the way, little hint, if you want to stop being blamed, start voting in larger numbers, because then they daren't blame you. The way to make Tories fear you is by going to the polling station. They don't like that. The second group of people that they're blaming are the businesses themselves. They're trying to maintain the baffling narrative that businesses could be taking advantage of a domestic workforce that isn't actually there in reality. That businesses having to scale back operations or even close altogether will be bafflingly simply refusing to employ British workers or something. That you've got this business going, I'm going under because I can't get my migrant labourers. Well, why don't you employ British workers? No, I don't want to do that. I'd rather go bankrupt. Because that's happening. But the thing about politics is we can poke at the contradiction in arguments, but not enough of the public will see them unless it's pointed out. Most people don't pay much attention to politics, unfortunately, and will have their views formed in the jelly mould of the press, who in this country exist to act as a sort of brain parasite for the small number of billionaires who profit from our misery. Like Rupert Murdoch, one of the first people to be vaccinated against coronavirus. His Fox organisation in America requires people to comply with strict measures against COVID in their buildings. And yet, they preach to their audience that they should not take these same measures seriously. A typical Fox viewer would not be allowed in their building if they took Fox News' advice. And the media in this country are full of this. You know, that's one big, terrible example in America. Our whole media is full of it. Maybe that's the reason GB News isn't doing so well. The market is already pretty well saturated with poisonous propaganda. And they also have a vested interest in making sure that Brexit is not reversed. There is never going to be an overwhelming number of people wanting to reverse Brexit in this country. It doesn't matter how much reality bites. There's never going to be an overwhelming number of people wanting to reverse it. Ever. A significant majority one day, sure. Hopefully not too many years away. But it won't be an overwhelming majority because too many sheeple will fall for the nonsense that they read without ever questioning the inconsistencies. So to reverse Brexit, we need to work together. You know, they know this, and so they will persist with their divide and rule tactics. Even blaming the Brexit voters for the consequences of loss of freedom is not as mad as it seems. Ordinarily, that would seem insane. You're blaming your own voters. You're telling your own voters that they're stupid. Because it sounds mad. But maybe, you know, you think, well, why would they blame their own supporters? Maybe it's more to get those who never supported Brexit to attack our fellow citizens rather than the people really behind it. Maybe it's to get us to blame Brexit voters more than the people who actually steered Brexit to where it is now. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.